Legend of Exorcism. Chapter 87. The Crown Prince's Nighttime Visit. Dark clouds covered the moon, and the exorcism department was dimly lit. Li Jinglong rushed into the courtyard like a gust of wind, only to see Mo Rijin, bare-chested, a few claw marks on his left shoulder. After Hung Jun checked him over, he silently thanked the heavens that there was no poison, and he went to go make some medicine. Mo Rijin, I told you to follow me, but you didn't want to. If it wasn't for how rash you were, how could that fellow manage to attack us? Lu Su raged. This was a rare occurrence of Mo Rijin also growing angry, and he replied, if you were willing to listen to me for once, would it still have run off? Okay, okay. Lu Su suddenly shouted. Next time, you go on your own. Stop arguing. Li Jinglong's head was currently still spinning. After so much difficulty, he had finally managed to find a clue, but now Mo Rijin had startled the Yaogwai in the mausoleum, and Mo Rijin and Lu Su were now arguing without end in the courtyard. Hung Jun wanted to go soothe Lu Su and lead him away, but Mo Rijin finally said, infuriated, Lu Su. Usually, I indulge your wishes, and you can do whatever you want. When have I ever scolded you? Right now, we're on a mission for the exorcism department, do you understand? Did you ever ask for my opinion on going on this mission? Lu Su didn't give even an inch and his voice was reaching that of a roar. Did you ever discuss anything with me before you acted? Both of you, shut up. Li Jinglong hadn't expected that the more the two of them argued, the fiercer the argument grew, and with a loud shout, the argument finally stopped. Hung Jun dug through to find ingredients for his medicine as he listened to Lu Su filling him in. It was only then that he learned of the general gist of what had happened. As it turned out, in the Xian mausoleum, Lu Su and Mo Rijin had also run into the Yaogwai that they had seen. To keep Lu Su safe, Mo Rijin had ordered him to stay where he was, while he himself rushed into the mausoleum hall, only to fall prey to an attack by the Yaogwai. In the darkness, that Yaogwai seemed to fill the air with devil chi, and Lu Su, worried about Mo Rijin's safety, couldn't resist casting magic. What he hadn't expected was that Mo Rijin had only sustained light injuries, and he was luring the Yaogwai towards the place where Lu Su was. As soon as Lu Su took action, that Yao grew alarmed, and it took the chance to flee. The two of them began to argue. Mo Rijin blamed Lu Su for not listening to his plans, while Lu Su blamed Mo Rijin for not telling him what he had in mind at all. After Hung Jun finished mixing the medicine, he said to Lu Su, all right, don't be angry. I won't work with him again, Lu Su said angrily. Hung Jun was torn between laughing and crying, but just as he was about to comfort him, Ashinakayang, Atai, and Chu Yangxi returned as well. Li Jinglong immediately said, now that everyone's here, it's time for a meeting. Mo Rijin's torso was still bare, and Hung Jun moved to hand the medicine to Lu Su, who didn't take it. Hung Jun put it in his hand, but Lu Su refused it, ignoring Mo Rijin. Li Jinglong frowned. Lu Su, stop making a fuss. At Li Jinglong's scolding, Lu Su immediately sat up straight. This was the first time that Hung Jun had seen Li Jinglong get angry, and instantly, the room grew so quiet that a pin falling onto the floor could be heard. Ever since the exorcism department had been founded, Li Jinglong had basically never reproached his subordinates. Everyone waited for him to get angry, but instead, Li Jinglong said, whether a mission succeeds or fails depends on the cooperation and trust between everyone. Since we have already accidentally beat the grass and startled the snake, what's past is past. What point is there in pointing fingers and assigning blame after the fact? It was silent for a period, before Li Jinglong said in the end, let's gather our information. How is the situation with waiting at the stump to catch the rabbit? The atmosphere lightened a little more, and Atai said, we didn't catch anything. Atai and Ashinakayang had stood guard at the Chiao mausoleum until the middle of the night, only to run into the exact same scenario that the other two groups had. Chu Yangxi, on the other hand, hadn't even entered the mausoleum, instead waiting outside to prevent him from being so frightened that he would shout loudly and ruin their plan. In addition to the information that they had before, two had appeared in the Ding mausoleum, one in the Qiao mausoleum, one in the Qian mausoleum, one in the Zhao mausoleum, and one in the Xian mausoleum. It doesn't match up, Li Jinglong murmured. Perhaps of those two in the Ding mausoleum, one was the one that appeared in the Qian mausoleum last night, Hung Jun suggested. It just went with the other one. That's not right either, Chu Yangxi said. There's too many. No matter how it is, the Zhao mausoleum was the first one where an incident occurred. Li Jinglong thought deeply for a moment, before he spread open a map, using a pencil to roughly sketch out the various mountains, before saying, let's assume that there are many of them. The first one entered the Zhao mausoleum on the 13th of the third month. When the exorcism department took the case, it was already the 17th, which leaves a span of 4 days in between. But when Hung Jun and Liu Su went in, they ran into Xiaoyu instead. That was a trap, Liu Su said. He was waiting for us two to go there. Li Jinglong said, it may have been a trap, but it might not have been for you two. Origin. Li Jinglong continued, tonight, I was enlightened to an idea. Everyone, think about this, what if Xiaoyu is not on the same side as these four Yaoguai, or is even in direct opposition to them? Chu Yangxi murmured, then that's right. Could it be that Xiaoyu was waiting for the Yaoguai that returned to the Zhao mausoleum? Li Jinglong merely nodded. The truth of the matter, which had been hidden by fog, was slowly growing clear. Origin frowned. So it was like that. First, a Yaoguai entered the Zhao mausoleum, leaving behind a trail. With that, Xiaoyu hurried in. Perhaps, in every royal mausoleum, there is something that they want to obtain, Origin continued. According to what we learned from our investigations tonight, this object is in the coffin. The first time some Yao entered the burial chamber, they may have obtained it, or they may have not. Let's split this into those two scenarios for further deduction. My guess is they haven't, Li Jinglong said, which was why Xiaoyu then went over. Perhaps, our deductions from before were completely wrong. Xiaoyu had never thought about luring Hung Jun and Liu Su into the Zhao mausoleum, this was merely a coincidence. Correct. A Tai picked up a pen and drew a circle around the 6 mausoleums. As of now Xiaoyu only has itself, and it's possible that it is unable to stand guard over all 5 of the mausoleums. Instead, it remained within the Zhao mausoleum, waiting for the Yaoguai to go and return. Those Yaoguai seemed to be making the best of their time to go to each of the other mausoleums, Chu Yangxi said. On the night of the 17th, they knew that Xiaoyu was waiting in the Zhao mausoleum, so they first sent one into the Qian mausoleum to scout ahead, finding what they were looking for. The train of events instantly grew even clearer on the night of the 17th. Xiaoyu had been lying in wait in the Zhao mausoleum, only to run into Liu Su and Hung Jun who were there to investigate. On that same night, the Yaoguai avoided Xiaoyu and entered the Qian mausoleum. Right after, on the second night, which was tonight, the Yaoguai that went to the Qian mausoleum brought another one with it to the Ding mausoleum. The other two split up and went to the Qiao and Xian mausoleums. Hung Jun applied the medicine for Origin. He couldn't resist being awed by the thoughts of this group, because they had managed to puzzle together what looked like something that had no head nor tail. There's no need to visit these 4 locations again, Li Jinglong said, making an X on the Ding, Qiao, Qian, and Xian mausoleums. The objects within were probably already taken. Tonight, perhaps. Marquis of Yadan, someone called out suddenly from outside. It was the third gang, and when everyone heard this, they were greatly frightened. The voice was very clear in that quiet night, and the doors to the exorcism department had been sealed by magic, so no one could come in. They could only wait outside. Li Jinglong sensed that that voice was familiar, and he jolted with surprise before rising swiftly to his feet. I have a few words to say, that person outside continued. This time, Hung Jun heard it too, it was the Crown Prince Li Heng. Li Jinglong gestured for the group to wait a moment, while he himself hurried out to greet their visitor. Emorigen then said, "Let's go into the study." The wounds on Emorigen's arm were not deep, and after they moved to the study, Li Jinglong invited the Crown Prince in, before saying, "Has your Highness also heard?" Li Heng swept his gaze over the cups of tea on the table before nodding. He asked Li Jinglong, "Is this truly ghosts wreaking havoc, or merely fake ghosts wreaking havoc?" Li Jinglong hadn't expected for Li Heng to jump right to the point as soon as he sat down, and he could only reply, "It is unclear as of yet." "Marquis of Yadan," Li Heng said solemnly, his expression shifting slightly, "my father, the Emperor, assigned you to my command. Since you needed money, I gave you money, since you wanted a title, I granted you the title of Marquis, and I have always spoken up for you at court. Why is it then that you always hide things from me? Have I offended you in any way?" Li Jinglong's brows were furrowed deeply as he replied, "Your Highness, with how I usually handle matters, before a situation has yet to reach its final conclusion, I never announce my guesses to the outside. No matter who asks, or who they ask, the situation is always it is unclear as of yet, and it is the same even when I am in front of His Majesty. But if you have any orders, please speak freely, I will do my best to carry it out in full." Li Heng was clearly still resentful of Li Jinglong, because of what had happened that day when the two of them had returned. He knew that this person usually seemed to be easy to get along with, but was actually very stubborn. For issues that he was unwilling to yield on, no matter what methods he used, this person would not back down. Li Heng watched Li Jinglong calmly, seemingly figuring out what his intention was. Li Jinglong didn't say anything either, merely sitting there just like that, countless thoughts speeding through his mind. This was already the second important personage who had come to the exorcism department, and for him to come in the dead of night without any bodyguards, on his own, what did that mean? Suddenly, a very troublesome thought came to Li Jinglong. As expected, Li Heng said, "Whether or not you believe in those legends of ghosts and gods, I do. There are some things that subjects cannot say, a son cannot say, but ancestors can say." Li Jinglong, "Isn't that true?" Li Jinglong was taken aback, and he replied quietly, "Your Highness, why would you think that?" At the same time, the study was lit with lamps, and everyone was searching through the records that had been stored in the exorcism department. What could be hidden in the royal mausoleums? Emorigen asked. Chu Yongxi pondered deeply. It should be some burial object that is in every royal mausoleum. It's unlikely that it's some artifact that contains spiritual power, but it's something that the Yaogui need. Heng Jun thought for a moment, before asking, "Are there only coffins in the burial chambers?" Ashinakayang nodded and replied, "All of the burial objects are outside. There's nothing else in the burial chambers." "Have the coffins been opened before?" Lu Su suddenly asked. After that monster left, Ashinakayang and Atai had followed in the shadows. In the night that was so dark that it was impossible to see their hands stretched out in front of them, they quickly lost the monster, and the two of them hadn't backtracked to check either. "We need to go back and take a look," Emorigen said. Zhenqi was thinking that as well before. Just as they were speaking, Li Jinglong had already seen Li Heng off to the courtyard. Heng Jun and the rest peered at them from a distance, with the hallway in between. This time, Li Heng had stayed for a very short period of time, but their expressions suggested that their conversation had not gone agreeably. "What you are protecting is the territory of the Great Tang," Li Heng said earnestly. "What I find from our investigations, is what it will be," Li Jinglong replied. "All of the things in the world must adhere to the one principle of logic, which is the truth. If it is truly as your Highness has guessed, I promise that I will not disturb the spirits of the royal ancestors." Li Heng let out a cold "Hn", and he flicked his sleeve and left. Li Jinglong, however, seemed to be very irritated, and he glanced at everyone before saying, "I'll have to trouble you all with one more trip." Everyone, take one last trip with me to the Zhao Mausoleum. Lu. Hung Jun, you and Mo Rijin stay here and stand guard. Everyone knew that Li Jinglong was bound to take this course of action, and though they had been busy for the entire night, they didn't feel weary at all. With that, they left the exorcism department, mounting their horses and riding away, leaving Hung Jun and Mo Rijin there to stand guard. Mo Rijin was exhausted, and he sat in the courtyard organizing his quiver of arrows, his head lowered, not saying a single word. Hung Jun watched him from the side, so Mo Rijin raised his head to glance at him, his forehead furrowed deeply. Hung Jun said, "Look, the Chang'an of tonight is so beautiful." "Beautiful my ass." Mo Rijin said, throwing the objects in his hands on the ground. Hung Jun began to chuckle, but Mo Rijin's expression was one of irritation and discomfort as he said, "I'm going to go dig up all the trees around here." "Don't!" Hung Jun protested. "Are you really that angry?" Actually, Lu Su is really easy to placate. I don't want to soothe him any longer." Mo Rijin looked around for a shovel, and he circled a few times in the courtyard before sitting back down in frustration. He said to Hung Jun, "In these past few days, I've had enough. No matter what I do, that brat just takes it all so brusquely. It's either N or thanks." "Hung Jun, do you get me? That feeling is truly..." Hung Jun sat down on the walkway, his expression doubtful as he studied Mo Rijin. Mo Rijin thought for a while, before finally saying, "I gave him a piece of ice stored in a jade teapot, yet he poured that water and the contents of the pot right onto my head." Hung Jun began to laugh, but Mo Rijin said, very aggrieved, "Say, what exactly did I do wrong? I feel like he likes you, but you don't really like him that much," Hung Jun said, walking out with his underwear. He had also pulled out Li Jinglong's pants as well, and now he sat down by the well to wash them. "I feel like Lu Su's pretty pitiful." When Mo Rijin heard that, he was startled. Hung Jun scrubbed for a while, his head lowered, before he then raised it and asked Mo Rijin, "Isn't it like that?" Mo Rijin didn't say any more. A while later, he seemed to be confused as he said, "I don't know. I can't think of being together with Lu Su, about what we'd do, or what we'll be like in the future." "What do you feel towards Zhenji?" Hung Jun replied easily, "I merely think about how I want to be with him for every moment of the day, about how I want to hug him and be by his side, and how I want to talk with him." Hung Jun always felt that Mo Rijin's attitude towards Lu Su felt as if he was being together for the sake of being together. He had also asked Li Jinglong before, who merely told him not to worry overly much, because this kind of thing could not be forced. "If you can't be lovers, being brothers is also pretty good," Hung Jun said. "Mo Rijin, I've always felt that since you got to know Lu Su, you've been acting weird." "How can I not be?" Mo Rijin sighed. "None of you are looking out for me, and I don't know what I should do." Clearly, Mo Rijin was a youth of advanced age who had yet to experience a lot of life, and from the beginning, this matter had left a deep impression on him. It had obviously overturned his world and his life. "I asked Ashinakayang, and he also taught me a bunch of nonsense," Mo Rijin said to Hung Jun. He had finally snapped tonight. "You know what he taught me?" As Hung Jun washed Li Jinglong's underwear, he looked at Mo Rijin. "That underwear clearly smelled of that from last night," and Mo Rijin added vividly, "He told me not to care about what Lu Su was saying and to top him first." Hung Jun replied, "That's not good, right?" Mo Rijin said, "If it's not good, then oh well." Just as Hung Jun was scoffing internally at what "if it's not good, then oh well" meant, Mo Rijin added, "The important thing is, I can't get hard." Hung Jun instantly felt awkward, but when he thought of Li Jinglong, that reaction of his had seemed to have come naturally. "But with girls, can you, that?" Hung Jun asked. Mo Rijin replied, "If I get close to them, then I can." Hung Jun realized a very serious issue. Mo Rijin truly did not like men. After the two of them discussed things for a while, Hung Jun had never thought about the existence of a question on this level with men, or with men and women. But since Mo Rijin said that he felt no desire for Liu Su, then there truly was no desire there. I said, if I can't get hard, then what? Ashinakayang taught me, I should undress myself, tie myself up with ropes, and kneel on the bed, and also blindfold myself, and let Liu Su do whatever he wants to me. He says that way, I can definitely get hard. When Mo Rijin was speaking, an image appeared in Hung Jun's mind of Li Jinglong in such a state, and he couldn't resist getting hard. Let's stop right there, Hung Jun immediately said. I'm so tired, I'm going to sleep. Mo Rijin could only let it be, and in the end he said, you're right, it's better to be brothers first. Saying this, he sighed again, gazing at the quiver on the ground as he lost himself in thought. End chapter. Legend of Exorcism. Chapter 88. Previous Emperor's Spirit Manifests. It was a long way to the Zhao Mausoleum, and last time, when Hung Jun and Liu Su had gone, it had taken them a good portion of a shishan. Even after the sun rose, Li Jinglong hadn't returned. Hung Jun tossed and turned, and he blearily had a strange dream while lying on the bed. It wasn't until the sun rose to the height of 3 bamboo poles that the rapid clatter of hooves and the sound of shouting woke him. When he came out, Mo Rijin had bared his arm that had been scratched, and he was currently using a mirror to change the dressing. Hung Jun was curious about what was happening outside, so Mo Rijin said, it seems like there are people out on patrol. Want to go take a look? Today, Chang'an was overcast, and it seemed like all of the residents of the city had flooded to the sides of the street. The emperor's sons were almost all out in full force, with only Li Longji and imperial consort Yang missing. The 6 armies had on solemn expressions as they stood guard, standing to either side of the street, blocking the residents. Li Hung rode a colorful piebald horse as he and the group of the emperor's sons sped past. Mo Rijin and Hung Jun dismounted, following them to the outside of the city gates. They stood amongst the residents that were there to watch the commotion, and in the distance, someone waved toward them. That was Feng Chongqing. Hung Jun still remembered him, and he and Mo Rijin hurried over to greet him. After they exchanged some words and Feng Chongqing learned that Li Jinglong had left the city to investigate a case and hadn't returned yet, he had Hung Jun and Mo Rijin stand behind him. A middle-aged man next to Feng Chongqing nodded towards Hung Jun in greeting. Hung Jun thought that he looked familiar, but could not recall who he was at that moment. That day, we even met each other in Pingkong Li. Have you forgotten? That middle-aged man smiled. Li Guinayan. Mo Rijin remembered. That middle-aged man was dressed elegantly, and his visage was a little younger than Feng Chongqing's. He smiled towards Mo Rijin, but Feng Chongqing said coldly, you went to Pingkong Li to mess around again. Li Guinayan smiled. They're youngsters, it's understandable. What is happening here? Hung Jun asked, looking into the distance. Ye Luo has come, as expected, Li Guinayan explained. At this time, a brass gong sounded outside to clear the way, and the horns all sounded at once. That display was very grand, and the guards clad in sumptuous armor formed 2 lines that led into the city. Feng Chongqing grunted coldly, look at this ostentatious display. Chancellor Yang bet that he wouldn't come, Li Guinayan smiled to himself. Now that he's come, the display will probably be a little more lavish. Feng Chongqing, however, coughed once, signaling to Li Guinayan that he shouldn't speak so frankly, because after all, there were 2 members of the exorcism department next to them. Who is Ye Luo? Hung Jun asked. Ye Luo is Ye Luo Shan, Li Guinayan replied slowly. Luo Shan, which is Lushan, refers to the god of light in the Zoroastrian religion. Mo Rijin instantly sensed that something was amiss, and he shot a glance at Li Guinayan, who merely smiled slightly. A drum beat 3 times, and the gates to Chang'an opened. A vanguard of ceremonial troops entered, and their uniforms were colored differently from that of the 6 armies, in black, red, and grey. That armor was crafted from brown and black leather, and their helmets were crafted of steel. Behind them followed a huge sedan chair that was being carried by 16 people, and on that sedan chair sat an incomparably huge person. Of all the years he had spent alive, this was the first time that Hung Jun had seen such a large human, and he immediately let out a wah. The residents all let out cries of joy as they welcomed that lord into the city. Feng Chongqing added, "And Lushan has grown even fatter." Mo Rijin said, "Why is he like?" For a long while, Mo Rijin was so speechless that he couldn't find a word to describe him. Hung Jun forgot where he had heard this name before, and it was only after Li Guinayan explained that he learned this person was the Jidushi of Hedong, and he was the military official that controlled the most troops and wielded the most power amongst all of those of the Great Tang currently. He was also Yang Yehuan's godson. Usually, Hung Jun felt that Li Jinglong's build was one that was large, and even if it was the king of the corpse ghosts, he would only use the term brawny to describe him. But when An Lushan appeared, that completely shattered what he understood of humans, and a single question resounded through his mind: what exactly did this person eat while growing up, to grow so large? An Lushan was only sitting, yet his feet were as thick as an elephant's legs, and his bulging, round arms wrapped in red cloth looked like painted pillars. His body was as wide as the archway, possibly even 9 chi tall and 7 chi wide. On his thick neck was a head as huge as a water jug, and his face was bulged with meat. Quite a lot of cinnabar and dye was dotted on his face, and a longevity lock hung from his neck. His chest rose and fell, he had been jostled around to the point of breathing heavily. Upon seeing that group of royal sons, An Lushan let out a laugh like that of a large bell, before saying, "I've caused a lot of work for you all." His words were evidently very lively, and Li Hung replied, "Our father, the emperor, is currently waiting within the palace. Why not head there first to visit him?" "Sure. Sure." As An Lushan was lifted through the main street, Zuk Street, he waved to the residents on the 2 sides. After him were 4 warriors riding on large horses, who were scattering money to the citizens, Hualala. Behind them were bodyguards who were carrying baskets, and they poured out the contents along the sides of the street. For a time, the entire street was filled with the sound of brass coins jingling, and the residents all let out cries of joy. All around them were Kaiwan coins rolling around, and that almost caused a stampede. The 6 armies struggled to maintain order, and they kept shouting loudly to not push. Feng Chongqing and Li Guinayan were almost pushed out as well, but just as Hung Jun was about to shout, an arm suddenly wrapped around his waist from behind, helping him stand firm, before letting go. Li Jinglong had emerged from who knows where, and there was the dust of the road on him. The 2 of them both looked towards Zuk Street, only to see that the residents had already been overcome with joy and had crowded into a single mass. Immediately, Li Jinglong made a gesture, and he brought Hung Jun with him as they followed rapidly behind An Lushan's procession. When Hung Jun glanced back, he saw Atai, Ashanakayang and the rest popping up. Chu Yongxi stood head and shoulders above the crowd, and he looked towards the cart procession, his forehead furrowed deeply. Chu Yongxi formed a magic seal with his hand. But just in that instant, in the cart procession, the warrior at the very end turned back. Li Jinglong thought, "Damn," and he hurried to gesture at him. Chu Yongxi pretended to duck his head to pick up some money, and the warrior turned his head back. With that, everyone stopped in their tracks, not daring to keep giving chase. Hung Jun was incomparably shocked, and when he looked towards Li Jinglong, the procession had already gone into the distance. Li Jinglong hadn't slept for the entire night, and he was clearly very irritated as he gestured for the group to return. When they returned to the exorcism department, Hung Jun was about to ask when Li Jinglong shrugged and said, "We didn't find anything." Mo Rijin said, "The ones by An Lushan's side, they wouldn't happen to be those 4 Yaogwai, would they?" Everyone had returned, and Li Jinglong sat behind the table, his arms crossed, not saying anything. Lu Su explained to Hung Jun, last night, the direction that they had left in was the northeast, and it just so happened that that was the same direction that An Lushan came from today. Hung Jun replied, according to this point alone, how can you conclude that those 4 Yaogwai are by An Lushan's side? It's merely a guess, A Tai said. First off, the sudden appearance of these 4 Yaogwai was already very suspicious. If An Lushan appeared in Chang'an first and something happened in the royal mausoleums, then it would be easy for others to connect that to him. Mo Rijin said, nodding. If An Lushan entered the capital and had his troops make camp near Chang'an first, waiting for these 4 Yaogwai to report in, that makes a lot of sense. Ashanakayang said, that might not be the case. What if that fatty doesn't know of the situation at all, and the Yaogwai are merely hiding themselves by his side? Chu Yangxi hurried in, and he turned and shut the door, smiling. Just now, with that test of mine, I was spotted as expected. As it turned out, in the crowd, Chu Yangxi had purposefully used a spell. That spell was a very short distance from An Lushan and his group, which was why that warrior at the very end of the procession had immediately sensed him. Was there a clear view of him? Mo Rijin asked. Chu Yangxi shrugged helplessly, replying, there was a clear view, but it was him who got a clear view of me. Everyone. Lu Su said, it's also possible that that warrior knows magic. I'm more willing to believe that he's a Yaogwai, Chu Yangxi said. There are many schools in the human realm, too many to count, but as long as they are cultivators, they all have a righteous air about them, more or less, not like that bastard, who looked at me with an evil air. Hung Jun thought of how those 4 warriors had tall and muscular builds, and how their arms and legs were long. At that time, he and Li Jinglong were the closest to those people. After a long discussion, the group could not connect what had happened with the black-colored Yaogwai that they had seen in the mausoleums, but Hung Jun had a dim sense that they were similar in some strange way. I think that Zhenshi. Hung Jun saw that Li Jinglong had his head lowered, but instead of being deep in thought like he supposed, Li Jinglong had actually fallen asleep. Everyone was at a loss for words. They had busied themselves for so long and had long since grown incredibly tired, so they all dispersed. Hung Jun went forward to go pick up Li Jinglong. He had been used to climbing up mountains since he was young, so his physical strength had always been great. He could easily lift something that was 200 jin with no problem, so he picked up Li Jinglong horizontally and carried him back to his room. The members of the exorcism department once again flipped night and day, and on this spring day, the surroundings were very quiet. Only a few birds called from time to time. Hung Jun laid down by Li Jinglong's side, and Li Jinglong, still sunk in dreams, unconsciously wrapped his arms around him and pulled him into his embrace. At noon, in the Xingqing Palace, Li Longji was taking his usual midday nap, and Lushan had returned to the capital today and presented himself before his emperor, which had taken up much of his energy. The white-haired emperor not only had to wake early to use powder to hide the wrinkles on his face, but also had to drink some ginger soup to brace himself. After the various matters were taken care of, Li Longji had Yang Yehuan properly placate An Lushan, while he himself laid down in his clothes in his bedchambers. In the next 2 months after this, there would probably be quite a number of envoys sent to the borders returning to Chang'an in a trickle. 10 days later was Guo Ziyi, and next month was Geshuhan, Gao Xianzi, and a group of generals. Every time someone saw him, they must have been thinking in their hearts, the Lord has grown old. But in this world, who wouldn't grow old? Li Longji closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Aging was not fearsome, but what was terrifying were the series of changes that accompanied it. Perhaps today, because he had seen An Lushan, the attitudes the Jadushi held towards Yang Qiuzhong caused him to once again realize that one day, once he passed away, the Yang family would naturally become everyone's target. When he relinquished his grip on the world, he would have no way to protect Yang Yehuan further, and when he thought to this point, he couldn't resist the wave of desolation he felt in his heart. A gust of wind blew in, and Li Longji's crowd of complicated thoughts disappeared completely. A voice spoke into his ear, "It's about time you wake." Who? Li Longji was greatly shocked, and he hurriedly rose, but in the next moment, something happened that gave him an even greater shock. A female ruler, dressed in the robes of an emperor, her bearing graceful, entered from the hallway. Her long hair fluttered in the wind as she said sternly, "Li Longji." Li Longji immediately let out a loud roar, and he was shocked out of his wits. He collected himself, but when he looked again, he realized that that was indeed Wu Zhao. In his life, he was most afraid of his grandmother, and he clearly recalled that when he greeted Wu Zhao in his youth, that air of twilight and the age that showed on her often caused him to feel fear towards death. Wu Zhao narrowed her eyes, and she slowly spread her arms, saying, "My great Tang has been blessed by the heavens, and the troops are strong and well trained. They are fit for the achievement of a millennia." "Yes, yes." Li Longji's face turned ashen white at that moment. Kneeling was not an option, but he didn't know what he should do. "But how can you allow that demonic woman to endanger the land? Your Majesty has pu this faith in malignant rumors. Such an unworthy descendant, how do you have the decency to face the royal ancestors of my great Tang?" Li Longji. Kneel. Though Wu Zhao had been dead for a long time, that influence was impressively overbearing, and with that shout, Li Longji instantly knelt, trembling and shuddering. "Mend your ways, quickly." With that last harsh sentence of Wu Zhao's, the former emperor's body turned into countless butterflies of light with a shua, which flew out of the courtyard, vanishing just like that. Li Longji was torn between shock and doubt, and he rose shakily to his feet. For a time, it felt as if he was still in a dream, and it was as if he was in a daze. Twilight of that day, in the royal study, Li Longji's eyes still held a trace of horror as he, Yang Qiuzhong, Gao Lishi, Li Heng, and several others sat there silently. It wasn't until someone reported from the outside, the Zhenji of the exorcism department, the Marquis of Yadan, Li Jinglong, requests to see His Majesty, that Li Longji said coldly, "Send him in." Li Jinglong had just woken when he had been summoned into the palace, and for a time he was still a little out of it. Finally, Li Longji could bear it no longer, and he raged at him, "Li Jinglong! Explain it clearly to Zhen. What exactly happened in the royal mausoleums?" Li Jinglong thought to himself, "Not good." He didn't have a chance to ask in detail, instead replying, "In the various royal mausoleums, the bodies of the former emperors still lie untouched." "Zhen is asking you," Li Longji said, his tone icy. Clearly, he had already learned of the happenings from Yang Qiuzhong, and now he said coldly, "Why are there ghosts wreaking havoc?" Li Jinglong kept feeling like there was something strange, and he studied Li Longji, before his expression shifted and he asked, "Your Majesty, have there been any strange occurrences recently?" If he hadn't asked that, things would be okay, but with that, Li Longji immediately grew more enraged. He roared, "Li Jinglong! How dare you be so bold?" Naturally, Li Jinglong didn't dare to butt heads with the emperor, so he hurried to kneel with one knee on the ground. He cupped his hands and said, "Your Majesty, please pardon this subject." This subject merely wished to know if anything strange had happened in the palace. Zhen saw the spirit of the former emperor, Li Longji said, his voice trembling. "With my own eyes, not in a dream." Li Jinglong. Li Jinglong swiftly raised his head, an expression of disbelief in his eyes. He thought to himself, so it was like that. The preparations that the enemy had made this round were all for this. On the night of the 13th, Li Jinglong said, the Judiciary Department accepted the case, and after that, Li Jinglong swiftly detailed the entire proceedings of the case to Li Longji, but in the process, did not include any of his own deductions. In these few years, Li Longji had heard countless critiques from the officials that had brought him great displeasure, and his heart already had a ghost in it. As soon as Wu Zhao appeared, his horror had immediately peaked. After he had woken from his midday rest, Li Longji had been a little shell-shocked, and after he finished listening to Li Jinglong's explanation, he finally said, Zhen only cares about what Zhen saw with his own eyes. Was it the spirit of the former emperor, or a Yaoguai? But just as Li Jinglong was about to reply, Yang Qiuzhong said coldly, Marquis of Yaden, before you respond, make sure that you've thought it through. Li Jinglong glanced towards Yang Qiuzhong. If he responded that it was a Yao and started a ruckus right in front of Li Longji, thus causing him to be shocked, it would be difficult to avoid losing his position due to this crime. If he responded it was a ghost, he could push off the responsibility right into Li Heng's lap, but he would have gone against the reality of things, and would also be suspected of withholding the truth of the matter from his emperor. Yao, Li Jinglong replied. The exorcism department is in the middle of an investigation. An unintended flaw in the plan caused your majesty shock, and this subject should die 1,000 deaths for that crime. Li Longji replied darkly, it wouldn't happen to be that someone is abetting you in working together to come up with this play for Zhen to watch, would it? Upon hearing these words, Li Jinglong's expression changed, and he immediately protested, Your Majesty. Where did these thoughts come from? That is definitely impossible. The color of Li Heng's face was ashen as Gao Lishi moved close to lean over and whisper a sentence into Li Longji's ear. Li Longji then regained the majesty that he had usually, and he said, the case of the royal mausoleums will be transferred to the judiciary department. Zhen wants to see what exactly they'll figure out. Li Jinglong will be put under arrest in the palace to await interrogation. Summon the members of the exorcism department to stand trial and have their crimes recorded. Your Majesty, Li Jinglong said, this subject has one more thing to report. Li Longji merely waved his hand tiredly, and the guards led Li Jinglong away. A thought came to Li Jinglong, and he turned to look towards the study. Before the door closed, Yang Qiuzhong looked towards him, an indistinct smile hovering at the edges of his mouth. End chapter.